Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and today is a very special day because we'll be going through the complete 7-decade history of Rodan, from his origins right up to his most recent appearances. Well, as complete as we can make it anyway. True, we're probably gonna miss something, but it's still my intention to be as complete as possible. We will be analyzing who and what Rodan is, where he stands in the greater franchise, and why the fans love him. So let us begin where it is most logical to do so, at the beginning. The year is 1956. Toho found incredible success with its first ever kaiju film 2 years prior, but the same effect wasn't quite reached with its immediate sequel. Still, there's a demand for more kaiju movies, and the crew at Toho is down to supply them. For that year, 1956, they turned to a novella by author Ken Kuronuma, which has not yet been translated into English, and they adapt that. The resulting film is Radon. And you might have just confused some of the people watching this by saying that. Don't worry folks, I can compensate for what Omni lacks, and I'll explain what he means too.
In the original Japanese, the kaiju we're celebrating today is called Radon, a name made by combining the second and fourth syllables of the word pteranodon. Internationally though, the O and the A are switched around, resulting in Rodan.
Why, you may ask? Well, that's where people tend to debate.
One theory suggests that Radon was changed to Rodan to avoid confusion with the element radon. However, the official Godzilla compendium attributes the name change as a way to avoid legal troubles with a British soap company called Radon.
Whatever the case, he remains Radon in Japan and is called Rodan everywhere else, and now you know. Thanks for the clarification, Snazzy. And just to be even clearer, we're still gonna be using the international name throughout the rest of this video. So, on to the movie itself.
For decades, the original Rodan has stood out in the kaiju fandom, and with good reason. This was Toho's first color picture, for one thing.
The process of colorization was still considered something of a luxury at the time, given how expensive it could be. Therefore, making Rodan in color was a really big deal, and that drew more attention to it.
From a storytelling perspective, though, Rodan went with a formula that I've previously described as Lovecraftian in nature. The plot has a very similar structure to a lot of Cthulhu mythos stories. It starts with what seems to be a grounded mystery. In this case, people are disappearing inside a mine. The first bit of evidence escalates the tension. A body is found, and its condition points to a brutal murder. The investigation reveals something strange and menacing. The murders are being committed by car-sized subterranean bugs called Meganulon. Solving this mystery only results in another mystery. Protagonist Shigeru vanishes while burying the Meganulon, he reappears with amnesia, yet his reappearance coincides with a slew of more unexplained disappearances and a mysterious photograph of something in the sky. Finally, we get the horrifying revelation. Shigeru remembers witnessing the hatching of the Rodans, two prehistoric beasts so huge that they make a quick snack of the insects. Of course, it continues with a city rampage and a bittersweet ending, but before all of that, Rodan really does fit in with the Lovecraft formula.
It's not just the cosmic horror aspect that makes Rodan stand out, it's also the Rodans themselves, beginning with their shared design.
Some early promotional stills and posters show a more bird-like monster, clearly inspired by different birds of prey, but the decision was made to ultimately go with something more prehistoric, which was the right call. Fans the world over agree this original design is the best Rodan has ever looked. The beak has a nice aquiline shape to it, and the dual crests are a nice way to set him apart from a normal pteranodon. The horns even give him a bit of a demonic appearance when viewed from the front. That menace is multiplied with how the eyes are deep-set and jet black, which is far more animalistic than Godzilla's eyes. The outline of the wings has some fine curvature that, in contrast with the devil horns, almost look angelic in how they arch and sweep. We can also see that while mostly membranous, there's some feather-like texturing near the body that adds a bit of variety to the wing design. Top it all off with an armored abdomen and a flat diamond-shaped tail, and you've got one of the best kaiju designs of all time. Even the color looks good. Rodan is sort of a reddish-brown, and the red can really stand out depending on the shot. Artwork and toys would really lean into this, usually depicting him as fire engine red. Clearly, Toho did not want to waste the fact that this was a color movie.
Yet a good design can be wasted without a good performance. And boy, does this movie bring a good performance.
The Rodans are always moving and always alert, whether they're being depicted with suits or puppets. Having learned from experimenting with the Godzilla and Anguirus suits before, steps were taken by Eiji Tsuburaya and his team to make the Rodan suit easier to move in and more expressive, and the effort pays off big time. Even the puppets used for the flying scenes look naturally rigid like an eagle in flight rather than stiff, lifeless mannequins. Of course, what really pulls it all together is the ending, in which the Rodans choose to die together rather than be separated. One of them doesn't quite escape the eruption in time, and the other simply can't bring itself to abandon its mate.
It's a dark ending, to be sure, but it's also kind of romantic. Even though these two have flattened cities and eaten people, you can't help but be moved by their devotion to each other. I'd also like to point out that this is the only time Rodan displays a breath weapon, and I mean that literally.
For one shot during the Fukuoka rampage, the Rodan on the ground exhales a jet of air to amplify the hurricane winds generated by his wings. They really wanted to emphasize his association with wind in this movie. I guess they found it redundant, though, since he never uses this ability again.
And if you think I'm lying about this being the only time Rodan has a breath weapon, just keep watching. You'll understand soon enough. That first Rodan movie was a huge hit, so it only made sense to eventually bring him back.
Despite an absence of almost 8 years, Rodan would return to the big screen in 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, fighting alongside Godzilla and Mothra to save the world from destruction.
Now, this movie gave Rodan his first major redesign, so we may as well address that first.
While still recognizable, the differences from the first movie are immediately apparent. The body is streamlined a bit, the wings now have one continuous membrane, and the tail now has 3 prongs to it. Then there's the head. This Rodan's noggin is a bit smaller than before, the beak is more conical, the horns are shorter and swept down, there are 2 points on his face that are just kinda there, and the eyes now have visible eye whites, so they now resemble human eyes. The intention was probably to make him look friendlier, since he becomes a good guy by the end, but most fans think the result looks kind of dopey, and I tend to agree.
What this Rodan may lack in appearance, though, he more than makes up for with personality.
For starters, he's depicted as every bit Godzilla's equal, as shown from their ongoing fight. Being able to fly gives him an advantage over the king, and he even appears unaffected by the atomic beam. At the same time, though, Rodan seems incapable of actually hurting Godzilla, who refuses to back down, so the fight is one of attrition.
Interestingly, this is one of the few instances in the entire genre where the kaiju are fighting simply because they want to fight.
There really is no greater reason. Godzilla and Rodan are just fighting for the heck of it until Mothra steps in. It's just like 2 brothers wrestling until their sister gets between them.
Whether he's fighting Godzilla or Ghidorah, Rodan also displays a high level of intelligence.
His attacks tend to involve strategy, particularly when it comes to outsmarting King Ghidorah. He lures the dragon into a chase so he'll stop attacking Godzilla and Mothra, then he turns and rams him. This makes Rodan one of only 2 kaiju who have knocked the dragon down, the other being Gorosaurus. It's also his idea to give Mothra a piggyback ride so she can web Ghidorah from above. In this movie and the next, Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, he even uses the terrain to his advantage, both defensively and offensively. In short, Showa Era Rodan fights smarter, not harder.
It's also worth noting that from this point onward, Rodan would be accompanied by music composed for another monster, specifically the music originally written for Varan the Unbelievable. That was not one of Toho's successes, and I guess they figured the tunes were just too good to waste.
Sadly, the last time Rodan was prominently featured in new footage was in Destroy All Monsters. Although he appears throughout the movie and is treated as one of the A-listers, his last significant act is to be taken out by the fire dragon before returning to Monsterland. From then on, Rodan would only appear in stock footage, which continued right up until Terror of Mechagodzilla. Despite being Godzilla's first ally, he would be moved to the background while the likes of Anguirus, Jet Jaguar, and King Caesar stepped in to fill that role.
It would be a long time before Rodan made his return to the big screen, and when he did, well, it was a little different than what came before.
Even though his sound effects would be recycled for both King Ghidorah and Batra, Rodan would not make a proper appearance in the Heisei era until after the halfway point in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2.
Now, there are some interesting things to note about this incarnation, the first of which is how there are technically two Rodans in this movie, at least from a trademarking standpoint.
The first half of the movie features Rodan, plain, normal Rodan. The second half features Fire Rodan, who, despite looking the same, is legally a completely different character.
If you're wondering what the difference is, well, it's that Fire Rodan has a heat ray. Remember what Snazzy said earlier about the first Rodan's literal breath weapon? Well, since that's air and not a beam, it doesn't count. Fire Rodan specifically has a uranium ray, and that is the only incarnation of Rodan to have this power.
Word on the street is that Toho is really strict about this point, and anyone who licenses Rodan cannot give him a heat ray unless they also license Fire Rodan. Can we just streamline the process and use the catch-all name from here on out? Sure, although speaking of names, that's another anomaly.
Remember that other bit earlier about how Rodan is the kaiju's international name, but he's still called Radon in Japan? Well, this movie is the only instance to date where the name Radon is used in both Japanese and English. This was one of several movies dubbed in Southeast Asia, you understand, so the crew probably didn't get the note about the difference. Thus, the original name is retained in the English audio. I'll still be using Rodan as I speak, though.
The third anomalous aspect, which is not often discussed, is that this Rodan might actually be a lady.
It's understood that the first two Rodans are mates, so one of them is female by default, though we don't know which one since we can't tell them apart. In the 60s and pretty much every other time, Rodan is regarded as male.
Curiously though, whenever this Rodan turns up in other media, there's a tendency to depict it as a female. Consider the young adult novels that Mark Saraceni wrote for Random House back in the 90s.
In Godzilla 2000... No, not that one. That's better. Anyway, in Godzilla 2000, the Heisei Rodan appears, as evidenced by the cover art, and the book has a subplot about Rodan building a nest and laying eggs on Mount Rushmore, something a female would do. This scene is recreated in Godzilla Saves America in 3D, essentially an abbreviation of the novel, and this plainly refers to Rodan as a she. A later issue of IDW's Godzilla Legends does something similar, though we'll be getting to that issue a bit later.
Now, perhaps you'll say that those examples are from other media, not the actual movie. And yeah, that is true, but I'd like to point out two things.
First, Toho has to sign off on how their characters are portrayed when they get licensed. Given how anal retentive they can be over details, as exemplified by the Fire Rodan distinction, these aforementioned depictions imply they are not opposed to the Heisei Rodan being female.
Secondly, the movie itself might actually be suggesting this.
Rodan has 3 horns in this movie, the central of which might be a normal pteranodon crest, while the other 2 are extra growths from radioactive mutation.
Oh, that's actually another thing. This is the first time Rodan is ever referred to specifically as a mutation, rather than just a naturally occurring creature.
Anyway, you might notice that the center horn is short compared to the head. This is actually how you tell male and female pteranodons apart. Females have shorter crests.
Ergo, I believe that at the very least, Toho is okay with depicting this Rodan as a chick, and at the most, it actually is one. So, mostly for my own amusement, I'll be referring to this Rodan as a female from this point onward.
Now, the fandom is actually a bit divided on how this movie treats Rodan, and it's considered the point where the character as a whole lost all mojo. This Rodan is small compared to other kaiju of the era, and she's significantly weaker, getting trounced by both Godzilla and Mechagodzilla.
Now, if you're looking at this purely from the perspective of power scaling, then yes, this is a massive downgrade. The Heisei Rodan's predecessor went toe-to-toe with an eldritch abomination and lived to tell the tale, but she gets shredded twice in one movie. Yet I believe this Rodan works because she retains the heart that was so important to the first movie.
Rodan's every action here is motivated by wanting to protect baby Godzilla, whose egg was in the same nest as hers. To this end, she takes on Godzilla, not knowing the egg belongs to him, then takes on Mechagodzilla. Not even death can stop her from this goal. She resurrects so she can protect the kid, then sacrifices her life to heal Godzilla so he can do what she can't.
In short, I don't care that this Rodan is weak because she is at the emotional core of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2.
And just to emphasize this point, compare her to the Millennium version of Rodan from Godzilla Final Wars. This Rodan, for starters, has a solid phoenix-like design, and is arguably the most powerful version of the character. Heck, every kaiju in Godzilla Final Wars is as strong as they can be.
If power scaling were truly the make-or-break issue, then Final Wars Rodan should be everybody's favorite. Yet he's rarely ever discussed because there's just not much to him.
He's just one of many kaiju being controlled by the Exilians to wreak havoc on Earth, and therefore, not really much sets him apart from the pack. Sure, it's noteworthy that Godzilla doesn't kill him on screen as a nod to their past alliance, but then again Godzilla also spares Anguirus and King Caesar for the same reason. But again, I like the design, no complaints about that.
You know, since the Meganulon also turned 70 this year, I guess it's worth noting how those bugs also got an upgrade during the Millennium Era.
Godzilla vs. Megaguirus gave the jumbo grubs an entire life cycle, showing them hatch from a single egg and grow into the flying Meganula, and Megaguirus is introduced as the queen of the swarm. Although I have issues with the movie itself, it was still interesting to see Rodan's food expanded into a bigger role. Megaguirus has a truly ridiculous design, looking more like a dragonfly from the Ultra series than something from Godzilla, but at least she's memorable. The energy-shooting stinger and scorpion claws allow her to do more physically than other insect kaiju, so that's a nice touch.
To date, Megaguirus has never had an official confrontation with any version of Rodan, not even in the IDW comics. I feel like this is a massive oversight that needs correction, but what can you do? Rodan's first appearance in the Reiwa Era is literally a blink and you'll miss it moment.
In the backstory montage for Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, we see Godzilla Earth marching away from two skeletons, which are all that remain of Anguirus and Rodan. Yet Rodan is portrayed with a normal pteranodon skeleton, and it's moved off screen in an instant. It was not the most flattering reference, and so it becomes just one more reason to hate the Polygon trilogy.
So forget that. Rodan's true return in the modern era is thanks to the MonsterVerse.
His inclusion was known from the moment a sequel to Godzilla 2014 was announced, and a cave painting in the post-credits stinger of Kong Skull Island got the hype train going.
So Rodan made his Hollywood debut and returned to the big screen in Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019, and what a triumphant return it was. Well, depending on who you ask.
I haven't really heard anyone complain about this Rodan's design. It's clear that the 1956 version was used as the base, with a few elements incorporated from different birds, particularly his vulture-like beak and more avian posture. The concept art experimented with different wing shapes and even considered giving him feathers, but this was dropped in favor of traditional pterosaur wings, and even his diamond-shaped tail is maintained. Still though, the rocky skin texturing was designed in such a way as to create the illusion of feathers, which feels like a good compromise. Of course, this Rodan has the most dramatic body-to-wing ratio, to the point where it's almost entirely wing. Pile on some finer details like how he constantly emits embers and flame, and you have one heck of a design upgrade.
Now, Michael Dougherty is a Rodan fan himself, so he made sure that every second the character was on screen counted for something. In fact, it's easy to forget that Rodan is actually in the movie less than Mothra is. It's in the characterization where fans get divided.
His status as a villain isn't really the issue, even though some of the concept art depicting him in a heroic light does look cool. Rather, it's his depiction as Ghidorah's main lackey after getting defeated and also losing to Mothra that led to people calling him a wimp.
Personally, I find that assessment to be grossly inaccurate. I mean, sure he loses, but he's one of the villains. What did you expect? Of course he was going to lose.
What about the fact that he's not dead at the end? Rodan is actually the only legacy kaiju in the MonsterVerse other than Godzilla and Kong who hasn't died. He goes up against Ghidorah and Mothra, and although he loses both fights, he also survives them. Add to that how he sleeps in lava, flattens a city without touching it, and wipes out an entire fleet of jets in under 2 minutes, and I'd say the label of wimp is undeserved.
Admittedly, though, that initial reaction has lessened over time, and now people are actively calling for Rodan to come back to the MonsterVerse in a more significant role. I guess time really does bring vindication.
Following that, Rodan made an unconventional appearance in the anime Godzilla Singular Point.
Every legacy kaiju gets an extreme reinterpretation in this show, and Rodan is no exception.
No longer one or two huge prehistoric nightmares, now Rodan is an entire flock of flying fiends who eat radio waves. The new design goes with a scientifically accurate body structure for a pterosaur, but it also removes a lot of the details that make Rodan recognizable as a result. The so-called mature form does have those dual horns, but that's about it. Despite being the focus in the first 3 episodes, the flock gets reduced to a background element by the end.
Then in 2026, right when it seemed like that was the end of it, Rodan made an unexpected and very brief return.
The final scene of Monarch's second season finale features Lee Shaw tracking Rodan in Thailand, thereby teasing him for a potential 3rd season or maybe a spin-off. We have yet to see what that will lead to.
So, as of this date, that's the extent of Rodan's major official appearances. But that doesn't mean he hasn't shown up elsewhere. Toho has a lot of kaiju under its umbrella, many of which you can see displayed around me. But the A-listers are collectively known as the Big Five, a group comprised of Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Mechagodzilla, and Rodan. And at times it feels like the order I listed them in is also their order of importance.
Obviously, Godzilla is the headliner. The studio never misses an opportunity to bring back Ghidorah and Mothra, and if Mechagodzilla gets a movie, it's very likely he'll get an immediate sequel. In fact, all 3 of these kaiju have appeared in movies independent from Godzilla. Rodan, though, doesn't seem to get nearly the same level of respect.
Now, to be fair, he's not completely neglected.
Variations of Rodan have shown up in series like Godziban and Godzilla Island, and he turned up in the first iteration of Godzilla the Ride, albeit as cannon fodder. I also don't think the resemblance borne by the Pokemon Aerodactyl is a coincidence.
So Rodan clearly left a mark, yet it doesn't feel like anyone at Toho actually cares about him. This didn't really dawn on me until the beginning of 2026, when all of Toho's social media loudly proclaimed that this was the 65th anniversary of Mothra, but they didn't say anything about Rodan turning 70. Dang, that's cold. Makes you wonder why he's even considered part of the Big Five at all. Well, I think I might have an answer. You may have heard of the phenomenon known as Big in Japan, where something that never quite finds an audience in the West somehow manages to become popular in the East. The inverse is also true, where something that fails in the East can take off like a rocket in the West. Now, Rodan might not be considered a failure, but he clearly doesn't get that much attention over in Japan. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest he's really popular here in America.
For example, did you know that Rodan was the first Toho kaiju other than Godzilla to get an action figure in the States? I speak of the one from the Shogun Warriors line, which is now a widely sought-after collectible. The line consisted of several popular anime super robots, a very odd-looking Godzilla, and an equally odd-looking Rodan. Of all the kaiju that could have made the cut, he got the priority.
That figure is almost impossible to find these days, especially for a reasonable price. But Super 7 did make a small replica as part of their Reaction Figures series.
Also, this is the first instance I'm aware of where Rodan was depicted as smaller than Godzilla. The figure wasn't alone either, as this off-brand imitation was released around the same time.
Now, if you want to get technical, the figure was preceded by an Aurora model kit of Rodan that was released alongside models of Godzilla and King Ghidorah. That's not actually a toy, but it still shows that Rodan was given priority in American markets.
Rodan would be prioritized in other toy lines as well, especially getting good treatment from Trendmasters in the 90s. He and King Ghidorah were also the only 6-inch figures made for the Jakks Pacific line based on King of the Monsters.
Playmates would also prioritize the original design for its short-lived Toho Classics figure line, and would eventually give the MonsterVerse version 2 figures, one normal and one Titan Tech variant. In 2025, the MonsterVerse incarnation also got a Christmas ornament from Hallmark, making him the first MonsterVerse Titan other than Godzilla and Kong to get that treatment, and the third Toho kaiju overall after the Showa Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla. Mashup figures based on him were also prioritized for the first wave of crossovers for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, respectively.
It's not all about the toys, though. Rodan's stateside popularity has actually led to him appearing in other forms of media as well, whether they be official or unofficial.
You might recall this brief cameo in a Simpsons anthology episode where he fights Paul Bunyan.
Then there was a drastically redesigned version that appeared in the Animaniacs episode The Warners and the Beanstalk, alongside a similarly drastically redesigned Godzilla.
I could not in Japan with Godzilla and Rodan.
The Heisei version is also a playable character in all 3 of the Godzilla Pipeworks video games. The classic version appears in the PlayStation Godzilla game, and the Final Wars version made the cut for the board game Godzilla World War Kaiju. Meanwhile, the miniature wargame Monsterpocalypse includes a kaiju inspired by Rodan named Pterodax from the pterosaur faction.
Speaking of homages, remember Reptar from Nickelodeon's Rugrats? He was obviously based on Godzilla, but he wasn't alone.
The made-for-TV movie Reptar's Rampage features the one and only appearance of Daktar, who is obviously based on Rodan. Even the crew behind Rugrats had a soft spot for the Terror of the Skies.
Fans of a certain age may also recall rumors of how TriStar originally intended to follow up the 1998 Godzilla with a similar reimagining of Rodan. Obviously that didn't happen, and it's possible it was never anything but a rumor, though I still think it's interesting that Rodan was considered the next logical step in the process.
Rodan is also no stranger to American comics. Technically, his first official appearance is in a short comic tied to the Trendmasters toys, and he got a very weird-looking homage in the Dark Horse run, but most people these days will know of his presence at IDW. Right from the start, Rodan was included in the major IDW Godzilla books, and he has remained present ever since, sometimes in the background, but usually as a major player.
Heck, Rodan was even given a solo comic in the Godzilla Legends anthology. Which I guess means I have to talk about that now. You sound uncomfortable, Omni. Only because of what the comic is about.
The story, entitled Lifespan, begins with Rodan's egg being transported to a lab on the mainland.
By the way, you may notice this is yet another instance in which the Heisei Rodan is implied to be female.
Anyway, the egg is being studied by Professor Holder, who is downright obsessed with the oversized ovum. He's so obsessed, in fact, that he doesn't seem to care about the woes of his son, Ethan. Poor Ethan is brutally tormented by bullies at his school, and while neither of his parents seem to care, it's the lack of attention from his dad that stings the most. So, when the lad hears his father ranting about how he fears that due to Rodan searching for it, the egg will be taken away from him, he concocts a plan. First, he convinces his dad to steal the egg and bring it home, and in his obsession, Professor Holder thinks that's a great idea. This gives Ethan the opportunity to bring the egg to school with him, but it's not for show and tell. He brings it knowing the egg will lure Rodan, and if he's lucky, she'll kill the bullies and destroy the school. This works, and when the egg hatches, Rodan carries her newborn away, seemingly unaware that Ethan has climbed onto her back so she can carry him away too. Meanwhile, dear old dad is arrested for treason, and he laments the many mistakes he made that led him to this tragic fate.
This story is not good. In fact, I'm kind of repulsed by it.
The allegory here appears to be about school shootings, showing how a boy can be pushed over the edge to commit such an evil act. That in itself isn't what repulses me, though. Rather, it's the confusing tone.
Now look, I'm sure the author John Vankin is not in favor of school shootings, and I'm sure this comic was meant to be a tragic cautionary tale, but the way the story plays out kinda makes it feel like all the death and destruction that happens in the end is justified. Stick with me on this.
The setup involves two sympathetic figures. On the one hand, Ethan is a tween boy getting mercilessly bullied, so he automatically has the audience's sympathy. On the other hand, Rodan is a parent trying to save her kidnapped offspring, and if the Taken franchise is any indicator, that setup gives fictional parents carte blanche to do whatever the heck they want to the kidnappers. The active antagonists are bullies who are depicted as 100% unambiguous, irredeemable evil. The passive antagonist is both a neglectful father and a mad scientist, two negative archetypes rolled into one.
We therefore have a clear delineation between who we should root for and who we should root against. But when combined with the metaphor, everything gets confused.
The comic wants me to simultaneously root for the sympathetic characters and condemn their actions as vile and destructive, and I can't do both at once. If I'm to root for them, I must also be okay with how they win, but if I'm to root against them, I must not want them to win at all. Again, I don't think the author meant for this to happen, but the fact that the story can even be interpreted this way is a problem. Maybe if it were longer, there could be more room to explore nuance, but as is, the story reads as if it can't make up its mind about what's right or wrong in this context.
Well, that's just one bad example. Rest assured, it does not represent the majority.
Admittedly, Rodan's role in the comics has been reduced over time, but he's not completely gone. Most recently, Rodan has prominently been featured in the Here There Be Dragons timeline, while the MonsterVerse version made his comic book debut in Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong 2. I mean, sure, it took a few issues for him to actually show up, but he graced multiple variant covers the whole way through.
Before that, Rodan actually got an homage in a comic that otherwise didn't really have anything to do with kaiju, an epic known as Planetary.
Now, just to give you a brief overview to understand it, Planetary, written by Warren Ellis and illustrated by John Cassaday, was designed to give the Wildstorm universe its own history by way of analogs and the public domain.
Ellis is known as something of a deconstructionist in comic book circles, but Planetary is a rare example of a reconstruction. It's got some deconstructive elements, sure, but the reconstruction that's added makes it a little more hopeful and optimistic than the vast majority of his other works.
Case in point, the second issue, in which the characters journey to an island in the South Pacific where giant monsters can be found. Unfortunately, the monsters are all dead, only their corpses remain. At first it seems really depressing, but on the final page we learn that at least one of these beasts is still alive, and what do you know? It looks like Rodan.
Now that is a very interesting choice.
The analogs for Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah are all decaying cadavers, but the one survivor, the one who ends the book on a note of hope and wonder, is the analog for Rodan.
Now keep in mind, this comic was written in the early 2000s and was primarily targeted at an audience that didn't even care about that obscure kaiju genre, and yet it was still a Rodan homage that was selected for the optimistic ending.
It might have been a random choice, but since everything else in Planetary is intentional, I think Ellis and Cassaday knew what they were doing.
Like I said, I think the evidence suggests that Rodan is much more popular in America than he is in Japan, so it's only natural to ask why that's the case. I think it has to do with availability.
It's easy to forget, but back in the day, not every Godzilla movie, or kaiju movie in general, was readily available at the push of a button here in the US. We of the older generations only had what we could find in video stores or what was playing on TV.
Interestingly enough, movies featuring Rodan, including the original and Monster Zero, were among the easiest to come across at any given time, whether you were channel surfing or exploring the local Blockbuster.
With the advent of the DVD, those two movies were among the first to get the new digital treatment from classic media as bare-bones discs that would later be upgraded.
This means The Terror of the Skies has had a near-permanent place in American pop culture almost from the moment the first movie was imported.
Licenses came and went, but Rodan always managed to stick around, so more Westerners are likely to recognize him, whether they're fans or not.
So, I believe Rodan's inclusion in the top 5 is an acknowledgement of his international popularity. As you can see, he's very well loved abroad, and especially here in the good old USA.
At the moment, Rodan's future is unknown. He's still featured in the IDW comics, and he even showed up in a Marvel crossover, but fans have been anxious for him to make a proper cinematic return. He's been teased as central to the third season of Monarch, although that hasn't been greenlit yet. Toho, as mentioned, doesn't seem to be prioritizing him at all, not even acknowledging his 7-decade milestone, so it's difficult to say when or even if he'll get a new movie in Japan.
Well, Toho might not care, but we sure do. We do indeed, Snazzy, and we always will.
Rodan is special among kaiju. His first movie had genuine scares mixed with genuine soul, and it brought Toho into the realm of color. He also was Godzilla's first trusted ally, a dynamic that changed the series and the entire kaiju genre forever.
Despite often getting left behind by the studio, he retains relevancy mostly thanks to the fans. And I think that's what it ultimately comes down to.
Toho promotes the bug and the dragon, but you could say that Rodan is the people's kaiju, for it is the people who keep him popular. So, this video exists as a love letter to the character, to his creators, to everyone who worked with him over the years, and to the people who keep his legacy alive today.
Happy 70th birthday, Rodan. Long may you soar through the heavens, as long as you don't fly over my house. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer signing off. And since it is the fans who keep Rodan alive, I now pass it on to you, the fans watching this video. Feel free to share in the comments what you think of Rodan. I'm assuming it'll be positive. You could say something negative, I guess, but you wouldn't do that on someone's birthday, would you?